My name is Marcin Draszczuk. I'm a programmer and the founder of Awesome Game Studio. We have self-published our first indie game in 2009 and kept self-publishing ever since. So as an introduction, I will quickly go over our titles so that you have some references later on. This one is Uzi Earth Adventure. It's an old-school platformer that initially launched on Xbox 360's Indie Games channel and later on Steam. Here is iZombie, a single-screen top-down mix of stealth and puzzle, and the first game that we have self-published on current generation consoles. Here's yet another Zombie Defense, top-down zombie shooter mixed with tower defense that was later upgraded to HD version and was surprisingly successful on every platform it made an appearance on. And finally, Fury Unleashed, a roguelike action platformer where you shoot your way through the pages of an ever-changing comic book. Sim launched in May last year on all major platforms after 3 years of early access. It was developed by a team of 5 people over 6 years, and another year of work was spent on post-launch updates. But not everyone in the team worked only on this project through all those years. So how did it work out? It received pretty solid critic scores from 76 Metacritic on Switch to 80 on Xbox One. It was very positively rated by players on every platform. Financially, it was what I like to call mildly successful. It sold 90,000 units at half to full price across all platforms in a year and a half after the full launch, and was selected to be part of Humble Choice May 2021 lineup. And all that converted to roughly $700,000 of net revenue, which is 2.8 million Polish zlotys. So it's definitely not an indie hit, but also not bad for, let's say, 25 many years of development. And now that you have some reference, let's move on to the main part of the talk. So the first and the most important decision you will make while self-publishing is choosing which game will you make. This will account for 90% of the financial outcome of years of your work. So nothing in the entire development or publishing process matters more than that. And you should not take this decision lightly. So a common pitfall for indie developers is to make a game they would love to play. But it's not a good idea to create it just because of that. And it's devastating to realize that you've put your heart and soul into making a game that just a tiny fraction of the market wants to play. And this was the case with our game Uzi Earth Adventure. But it's also not a good idea to make something only because it looks like it's something that will sell. That's because you'll find it difficult to dedicate work to it. And this was the case with our game Yet Another Zombie Defense. So the best option is to combine both, creating something you are passionate about, but also something that there is demand for in the market. But even when you take this approach, you can still make a mistake. And with Fury Unleashed, we thought that in the era of blockbuster superhero movies, making a comic book superhero-themed game would be a good idea. But it wasn't. It turned out that superhero movie fans are there for the superheroes they love and not for the general concept of superhero. And also, you should keep in mind that unique design doesn't always mean it's desirable. There's a thin line between original game people will appreciate and a weird game people won't understand or want to play. And of course, it still needs to be something you have the capabilities to make. Even if you make an excellent idea for an open world RPG, you won't be able to make it happen without tens of millions of dollars. If you aim too high, you will never finish it or it will come out just plain bad. So you should also check if the idea fits with your team's skill set. So how to choose the right idea? I'd say note them down as they come to your mind over time and compare them to each other. Here's a simple matrix I made when I was considering which project to make after Fury Unleashed. Money is how much sales potential I believe a project has. Fun is simply how fun would it be to develop. Dev time is how quickly can it be made, and prestige is how beneficial it would be to the company's reputation in the long term. Of course, it's more of an estimation than a solid calculation, but it can help you organize your thoughts and compare the options you have. So before we fully jump into self-publishing, it's worth asking yourself a question whether would it make more sense to get a publisher for your game. Of course, there are pros and cons to that. So first of all, publishers usually fund your game so you can sleep well at night without worrying how to pay your bills. Next, they have experience which can filter out bad ideas and help you make a better game overall. Third, if they have built a reputation, it will be easier to get the attention of media, influencers, and regular players. And finally, they allow you to focus solely on the development and not on discussing your marketing strategy, answering business emails, creating trailers, and so on. But all that comes at a price. So first of all, there will be less creative control of a game, as the publisher will ask you to make some changes in the game that they believe are for the better. Second, your revenue share will be significantly lower than the 100% you are getting with self-publishing, and sometimes the game will need to recoup not only your development funding, but also marketing spending before you see any revenue share from the game. And finally, there's some business risk connected to having a publisher, because there's always a possibility that they won't pay you for some reason, such as going into bankruptcy, inflating marketing costs, or simply breaching the publishing agreement. And taking any company to a court, and especially a foreign court, is an expensive and lengthy process. So it's best to avoid such situations. And it is important to know that not all publishers are created equal, and whether you should get a publisher depends on which publishers are interested in your game. So here's a simplified profit versus game sales potential chart. With self-publishing, the money you receive simply scales with the financial success of the game. You spend some money on the game and its marketing. If it breaks even, you make a profit. If not, you are at a loss. It's a high-risk, high-reward situation. If you sign with a publisher that I call neutral, you simply outsource the business risk and marketing work in exchange for a lower revenue share you would be getting than if you self-published. Here's a great publisher. They would increase your game's success thanks to their marketing skills and brand recognition, making it profitable where it would be a loss otherwise, and increasing the revenue by more than enough to cover the revenue share they make. But if you choose a bad publisher, it's likely that you'll never see any revenue other than your development costs, as the publisher will not take care of your game as they should, or will just fulfill the absolute minimum of the agreement terms. And the worst case scenario is a publisher that goes into bankruptcy or decides to go hostile and break the agreements or sue you. So the reason we have never signed with a publisher is that the publishers we knew that are great simply weren't interested in Fury Unleashed, maybe for a reason. The tricky thing about great publishers is that they get so many great game pitches and can pick up the strongest ones. So unless your game has a lot of potential, they are unlikely to pick it up. And we were able to fund the development and publishing, so we didn't really need to find a neutral-looking publisher who might have ended bad or hostile. Okay, so now that you have chosen the concept of your game and decided you will be self-publishing it, you need money to develop it. And there are several ways to fund your game. First is spending your savings. It's great if you have a pile of money you can spend, but it's rarely an option. Next, working part-time or doing outsource or freelance work. It's a safe route you can take, but it will take you a long time to develop your game. And I'd recommend it for beginners, and this is also how Awesome Game Studio was started. The next option is seeking an investment in exchange for a stake at your company, but you'll need to demonstrate some professional experience to get that. And keep in mind that in that scenario, you're selling the stake at the company, not the project. And you'll probably be required to stay with the company for at least a few years. Then you can try crowdfunding. It's very unlikely that you will be able to cover the entire development cost with crowdfunding, but it can help you get to the next stage. Early access, it's very risky because there's no guarantee that the game will sell well enough to cover your expenses necessary to finish it. You could take a loan, which is extremely risky and super stressful, but far less expensive than investors or publishers. And I'd say only take this route when you are safe that you will be able to pay it back when the revenue of your game comes after the release. For example, when your wishlist counts are solid. We have used that option in the 5th year of the development of Fury Unleashed, when we knew we were close to finishing the game and that we would be able to pay it back. Previous self-published project, it's great if you have a long tail revenue from the previous project you made, and this is how main part of Fury Unleashed development was funded. And finally, publishers again. We have already decided to self-publish, but if you run into financial trouble during the development, it's a lifeline option worth keeping in mind. So the next lesson is choosing the right name of your game. Here's the title of one of our games. Who's gonna say what's wrong with this game? Anyone? Yeah. It's hard to pronounce. You don't know how to pronounce it. So maybe it's Uzi, maybe it's Ozzy. And when someone tells you the name of the game, you don't know how to type it into search engine. So it's one issue. And another is it looks like a DLC for a game called Uzi that you have never heard about. So the first step of choosing a good name is to build a list of candidate names that are easy to pronounce and to write down from hearing, easy to search online because you don't want random results to come up in the search, that don't infringe any copyrights, like Scrolls or Doom RL got sued by Bethesda or taken down. It needs to be original because you don't want it to be confused with some other game. Like I mentioned, you should avoid colons in the name because people will assume it's a DLC. And finally, avoid profane words. This should be obvious to everyone, but isn't, because Fury Unleashed used to be called Badass Hero. So to us, a team of non-native speakers, it sounded cool, but to native speakers, it sounded cringy. It also caused issues with profanity filters on ad networks, with social media, with regular media, with influencers, so just don't do it. Or you'll have to change it at some point, and changing the game's name means that a large part of the marketing effort you have done by that point will be lost, as people will never find out that the game they were looking forward to playing has already launched under a different name. And also, don't choose your game's name in a hurry. Give the list a few weeks to mature. You'll be surprised how perspective changes over time. And then you don't even need a name to start promoting the game. Here are the examples of Crowsworn and Midnight Fight Express building a large following on Twitter, even months before they announced the game's name. And here's an example of us promoting our next game also without a name. And we got over 100 followers from a single tweet with an animated character, which is great for us. So I can recommend it to try it this way. And also, before you commit to a name, you can use some A/B tests on Facebook to check which one gets better click-through ratios. We'll probably do it at some point with our next titles. Okay, lesson 5, spending your promotional budget. From our experience, an in-house community PR manager works out a lot better than external agency because it's easier to communicate as they are always in your office rather than you having to schedule calls or exchanging emails. And they will also be able to create promotional materials directly from the game instead of you having to create those for the agency to use. You should focus on channels that give you external outreach. Facebook allows you only to talk to your fans, which is sometimes useful, but with Twitter you can reach people who aren't aware of your game's existence. Instagram in theory does, but we never got it to work for us. I believe that maybe the gamers are simply not there. Imgur got us hundreds of wish lists. It's hard at first, but if you learn it, you can get great results. I suggest that you read the guide How to Get on the Front Page of Imgur by Chris Żukowski. Reddit is quite difficult with their 10% self-promotion limit, but some subreddits allow submissions exceeding the limit, especially if you ask the moderators nicely first. For example, the indie gaming subreddit is almost purely self-promotion. And also you can ask a friend who is an active Redditor to post the trailer of your game, or if you don't have one, you can ask me. My username is madraspl. You can also run AMAs, which is short for Ask Me Anything, on Reddit, and they are easy to get even when you don't have an active Reddit account, but unless you are already popular, they don't attract too much attention. And we've heard some reports of TikTok working out great for indie devs. We haven't been successful there yet, but some indie game developers certainly were, getting 3,000 wishlists from a viral TikTok video, as you can see in the screenshot. Advertising. It didn't work for us. We've tried it, got nowhere near a positive return on investment. It was more like 10% return on investment. And almost no one in the indie world is doing it except some publishers who I guess know what they are doing and have a lot of experience and data coming from many different games. Exhibitions seem to be a more effective alternative outside the pandemic, of course, but keep the demo short. You don't want one person to occupy the seat for too long, and you don't want them to get bored with it. And you should try to make appointments with media and influencers ahead of time, because their schedule is usually very busy and they don't have much time to wander around and discover your game. You can also encourage people to sign up for your newsletter. Leaflets end up in the trash at some point, but if they enter their email, you'll be able to reach them years after the exhibition where your game is finally released. And the last tip, outsource the production of your trailers. Making trailers is something you need to do all the time to be good at it, and your launch trailer is the single most important marketing asset of your game, well worth the money you spent on it. Okay, this might sound obvious, but don't accept every distribution offer. Various distributors or software or hardware manufacturers will approach you with an offer to work with them, and usually it is not worth your time. If it was otherwise, you would be approaching them because you've heard a recommendation from another indie or simply because everyone was doing that. Why? That's because you'll need to read through the legal agreement, you'll need to provide them with marketing assets, integrate some special SDK into your game, or invoice their monthly reports of €2.5 royalty earned, while the royalty payout threshold is €500. And all that takes away your time, and time is money. So by accepting the unsolicited offer, you might be just losing money. So, which distributors should you work with? Steam is, of course, the most important one. GOG is also worth it because they have a dedicated audience. Humble Store and Fanatical don't have very strong direct sales, but Humble Bundle is the best bundle out there, and Fanatical's bundles make some nice extra. And Epic Game Store may be worth it if they pay you upfront for an exclusivity deal or putting your game for free in the store. Unfortunately, there are no reports of how direct sales revenue on Epic Game Store looks like, but it appears that having a 1-year exclusivity doesn't hurt subsequent Steam launch. And other resellers probably aren't worth it unless you are a big hit and extra 0.2% of revenue gets you thousands of dollars, and you still might be just undercutting your Steam sales. Okay, the next one, I think you should try to release on as many platforms as you can. If you are using a third-party engine such as Unity or Unreal Engine, and you should be using one of those, it's really easy to port a game to consoles, especially if you implement a minimum set of features required, because, for example, leaderboards aren't required on Switch, PS4, and Xbox One, and achievements aren't required on Switch. And in case of Fury Unleashed, it took a programmer who was already experienced with console development, roughly 5 months per platform, to implement all mandatory functions, integrate achievements, leaderboards, and 2 players local co-op. Additional 3 months of another experienced programmer were needed to optimize the game for Switch. And it was well worth it. In case of Fury Unleashed, consoles account for 64% of revenue made since the full launch, and that's including Humble Choice. So we've tripled the revenue by adding roughly 10% of total development man-months. And in general, it's much easier to get launch or sale exposure on consoles than on Steam. Mac earned 0.7% and Linux earned 0.3% of overall revenue, so probably wasn't worth it, especially that we had to buy the hardware needed to develop and test on Mac. And it definitely wouldn't be worth it in early access. You would have to create and test 3 builds instead of 1 every time you update the game for a negligible extra revenue. And mobile ports are currently in the works, so we don't know how are they going to work out yet. So how do you launch on every device? I'd say media are much more likely to cover a multi-platform launching game than a PC only. Indie ports are very unlikely to get media attention, so it's usually better to sim launch. But don't announce all platforms at the reveal. It might be tempting to announce it's coming to PC and Xbox and PlayStation and Switch to get more media attention, but a better strategy is to announce PC only and then see if you can get something from either platform holder. Maybe they will offer you to include your game in their conference or offer an exclusivity deal that will cover half of your development budget. If you announce your game is coming to every possible platform right away, like we did with Fury Unleashed, then you definitely won't get anything. And if you can't launch all platforms at once, talk to the console platform owner who you want to launch the game first and offer a timed exclusivity deal. You might get a few months of extra store visibility like we have with yet another Zombie Defense HD on Xbox One. Crowdfunding. So we didn't do crowdfunding with Fury Unleashed, but I believe we should have, as crowdfunding gets you not only money, which is important, but also helps with marketing and community building. But it's not for free. From what we've heard from other indie devs, you should plan for a full month of work to support your crowdfunding campaign, and you should set the goal reasonable. A failed campaign will send a message to media and influencers that there's not much interest in your game, and if the campaign fails miserably, maybe the game isn't worth making after all, and you should cut the losses right away. Oh, and you shouldn't put any crowdfunding site above Kickstarter. It's like Steam of crowdfunding at the moment. Early access. Like I mentioned previously, it's a risk. If your game is successful, then it's great. You funded the rest of development and media will cover every update you make. But if it's not very successful, it will make marketing of your game an uphill battle. So, which was the case with Fury Unleashed, called Badass Hero back then. As you can see, there was just 57 players in the peak hours on the game's launch. And over the 3 years of early access, it earned less than 10% of what it earned in a year and a half after the full release on all platforms. It definitely wouldn't be able to fund the rest of the development alone, and we were lucky to have other titles in our back catalog. So why is it an uphill battle? That's because media and influencer will consider your game as released. They won't wonder anymore, is this going to be an indie hit or not? Because they can already see it's not. And the same goes with publishers. We've pitched Fury Unleashed to one major publisher after early access launch, and they directly told us that they don't have any interest in already published games. And finally, there's an extra cost to running early access because you'll have to spend time building and testing each release build. And you shouldn't consider the wishlist that you have built during early access are as valuable as pre-release wishlist, because they are not. Those are people who are interested in the game but not hyped enough to buy it right away. And they might buy it only when it's on a 70% off sale. I strongly recommend against localizing your game in early access. It's a huge overhead and a financial cost that will make you worry about changing the text that is already in the game. And it will attract users who are not fluent with English, which will make it difficult to take feedback from them. If you do early access, make sure to utilize the feedback you get from it. Negative Steam reviews are the best source of feedback. They mean that something in your game was such a big problem that they decided to publicly write they don't like the game. It's easy to shrug it off, but don't do it. They're there for a reason, and discussions on forums are not as good, and you shouldn't follow every feature request that is made in the forums. Sometimes they are good ideas, but sometimes they are horrible, and it's your job as the self-publisher to decide if they are worth your time, which is also money. And don't worry about staying too long in early access, because players will not care that you didn't leave early access at the time when you have promised that you would. Just as long as you make regular updates, and that is no less than one every 2 months. We said that the game will be in early access for 1 year. It took 3 years to graduate. We are expecting backlash from the players, but there was none, simply because we have updated every 2 months. So it worked out actually all right. Okay, watch out for feature creep. When there is no publisher telling you what to do, it can be tempting to add anything that comes to your mind to the game. Like, we've decided to add customization to our game because it's so cool, but later we've realized that it's not a feature that helps sell the game. And it also limits us with what we can do to improve the hero's animation. We've decided to add 40 bosses to our game, also because it was so cool, but later on we came to a conclusion that it would be better to have half the amount and more polish. And finally, we've decided to add local co-op to our game because a vocal minority of our users have asked for it, but it turned out that only a small fraction, like 5%, plays local co-op these days, and it cost us a lot of design and programming work that could have been better spent elsewhere. So how do you avoid feature creep? Give it some time before you decide to do it. It might not sound so great a few weeks later. Always evaluate if it will increase the game's value or marketability, and being a fun thing to do is not enough. And keep in mind that cost of adding one more feature is not linear, it's exponential because features interact with each other. It might look simple to add it at the current stage of development, but you might swear at it years later when you have to make it work with another feature you haven't expected to have at that stage. Okay, now a few words about exposure, which is the holy grail that you can get from each platform holder. They have different opportunities for you, and I'd say you should try to utilize every one of them. Let's start with Steam. So first step you can take on Steam is setting up your store page where you can direct players to wishlists, and only the publishers with strong marketing muscle appear to be successful with out-of-the-blue releases. To set up a Steam store, you only need to add 4 screenshots, but Valve may require you to also upload a working build so that they can see it's an actual game and not some mock-ups you want to try out. Then you have the Steam Next Festival. You can put your game's demo in hands of thousands of players, but make sure it's really polished and not too long. Common practice appears to be launching a short demo well ahead of the full release and listing it when full version becomes available. And another common practice is launching free prologue versions, which are like demos, but use separate app IDs. And this allows them to get their own reviews and more exposure as they are already released products. And they can also get to popular new releases Steam front page tab. And finally, pre-orders, but they are available only to the most anticipated titles on Steam. Okay, moving on to Xbox. Microsoft has 2 YouTube channels where they host trailers of third-party studios. Main Xbox channel has a pretty solid reach, but is currently limited to trailers of most anticipated games. We got there once before they started the second ID at Xbox channel, which is rather small. Microsoft claims its followers are very dedicated to indie games, so it's probably worth to submit your trailers there as well. The next opportunity on Xbox is Xbox Wire, which is a blog where you can post articles about your game. And the only requirement is that it needs to be unique to the blog, so you can't reuse your own blog posts. And after your game has passed certification, you can set up a trial version and pre-orders, which are available to everyone, unlike on Steam. And Microsoft claims it's a very effective combo and allows you to be visible on coming soon page of the dashboard. We did it for Fury Unleashed. A month of trial version and pre-orders resulted in 4,000 trial downloads and over 300 pre-orders. Moving on to PS4. So Sony has a great YouTube channel with a really low barrier of entry. We were able to get all trailers for Fury Unleashed and even Badass Hero on the channel every time we tried. And it brought us a total of 430,000 views, which is a pretty solid number. The next opportunity Sony gives you is the PlayStation blog. Similarly to Xbox Wire, they require you to write some unique content for the blog. We can't tell how many views we got there, but it didn't cost much to write it, and some people certainly found out about the game from this post. Next, on PS4, you can put your demo in the demos section of the store, which isn't very crowded and gets you a lot of free exposure. Only your demo needs to pass certification, not the full version. So you can do that long time before your game is actually finished. And on PS4, PS4 pre-orders are available only for hugely anticipated titles like on Steam. Finally, Switch, the last major platform we released on. It has the biggest reach of its YouTube channel across all platform holders, but is also the most selective about what they host. We've managed to only get one video there, but the views count was highest among all platforms. And you should make sure to pitch at least a week and ideally 2 weeks before the planned release date for the trailer. Then there's Indie World Showcase. We never got featured there, but every showcase gets a lot of views, so it's definitely worth trying. And it's also possible to set up demo and pre-orders once your full game has passed certification on Switch, and your games page will be shown in the coming soon section of eShop, which provides pretty nice visibility. The next lesson is to avoid making unnecessary promises, because it's very easy to make a promise to the public about something you are excited about, but it's very difficult to withdraw from it when you realize it's not a good idea. So it's better to be rather cautious with making those and only do that when you are certain you will be able to fulfill it and that it's worth it. Like here, when a few days after the full release, we've decided to add online co-op mode to Fury Unleashed and announce it right away. And a few months later, we've realized that it will be more time consuming than we had anticipated and kind of regretted announcing it. Lesson 13. Almost every game in the industry is late. And when someone asks you about when will it release, I'd say always avoid giving a specific answer. And if you really have to give an answer, give yourself a buffer for delays. You'll use it and you will be late anyway, but it will not be as stressful. And also take into account that you will probably be late when you're planning your budget, especially when you are using external source to fund the development. The next lesson is to watch out for changes in the market. You should periodically re-evaluate decisions you have made some time ago and check if circumstances haven't changed. Because you can run into a situation like when we have started development of Fury Unleashed, there was several roguelites on the market. And when it was released, the market was fully saturated with them, so we had to raise the quality during the development just to have a chance to stand out in the market. Another example was on Steam when we were running week-long deals. That was the best way to discount your game for quite a while due to Steam's front page featuring the sale on Monday. The other option was Steam's custom sales, which are up to 2 weeks long, but with no featuring. And at some point, we have noticed that there are more and more games participating in week-long deals, so the extra exposure on the Monday was diminishing. And we've switched to custom sales and noticed that even though we don't get the day one visibility boost, overall revenue from the sale is higher because simply the sale lasts longer. And finally, we had an idea of adding cameo modes to our game, and we hope that Valve and the developers who made those games would agree to exchange coupon drops with us on Steam. But we didn't notice that Valve has completely stopped dropping coupons until we've had those cameo modes almost implemented. Lesson 15. Sorry? Yeah, if they agreed to it. You should choose your release date wisely. The September-December period, I'd say, should be avoided as hell. And in October and November, vast majority of gamers, media, and influencers are focused on AAA titles. And in September, all the indies that wanted to launch before AAA season start come out at once, so there's a lot of competition. And in December, everyone has already bought games on autumn sale or is waiting for the winter sale. So here I'll show you a slide from Microsoft's Idea at Xbox representative's presentation. If you still have doubts about it, you should watch the fragment of the video which is linked below. and also visible on the next slide. I'd also say that it's unwise to launch during Steam's summer sale or winter sale or autumn sale. And you shouldn't be afraid to move your release date if something hugely anticipated and in the same genre launches the same week. A few days after we've announced our game's early access launch day, Hollow Knight announced it will launch on the very same day. And at first we thought it's just a silly game about some bugs. And then 57 players are playing Fury Unleashed and 2077 are playing Hollow Knight. So it won't hurt you so much if you move the release date in such a situation. So when the day of your release comes, be aware that it will be super busy and super stressful, and it's only a few hours long. So ideally, you shouldn't plan any work for that day and save it for any unexpected events. Try to do as much as you can well ahead of the release. For example, plan to have your launch trailer ready a few weeks later. It might come at the last minute anyway. Try to pass certification as early as possible. It will allow you to set up pre-orders, demos, more time to send out the game keys to media and influencers. And I think you should start reaching out to media and influencers a few weeks ahead of the release because they need to fit you into their schedule. And you should also build a review code distribution system because the review codes you get are limited, so you won't be able to send one to every media outlet or influencer out there. It allows you to deliver review codes without them sending an email back to you that they want one, which can sometimes cause a friction, and they wouldn't request a code from you, but they would click the link you send them. So this is what our system looked like. Each media outlet and influencer got a unique link, which would instantly and conveniently get them a key for their preferred platform and region. And with code, it provided them with all necessary links and information. And it allowed us to see which media have taken the code, so we could follow up more freely those who haven't taken the code. And overall, it resulted in a pretty good amount of reviews for the game, total 33 Metacritic ranked reviews across all platforms. Next, you should set the embargo for the launch day or the day before, because more than that, and many players will forget about your game by the time they can buy it. And media and influencer are used to embargoes, so don't worry that it will decrease your chances to get coverage from them. Next, make sure to follow up to those who haven't responded. One follow-up is totally fine, 2 or 3 is pushing it, but journalists in major media are said they are used to it. And also don't plan any vacations for a month later after the launch or any content updates. Give yourself time to fix the bugs that come up and respond to any unanswered emails. Post-launch. DLC sales are percentage of your full game sales, so the greater success you had, the more sense it makes to create it. But think twice if you want to spend precious months of your life doing that. Typically, you will be exhausted with that project and you want to move on to something new and exciting. The next thing is to put the game on sale as frequently as for as long as possible. Each platform holder has their own sales limits and guidelines. It will probably surprise you that seasonal or team sales are usually not as profitable as custom sales. Why? That is because they tend to be overpopulated, and also the biggest titles are on sale during that time. So you should participate in those sales, but don't prioritize over custom sales. And curated spotlight sales are the best, such as Valve's daily deal. Ask for those, but when you hear a no, be nice and don't push it. You might get surprised later, like we did when we one day saw our game featured as daily deal because there was an unexpected slot opening. So a few months after your game has launched, you should start trying to get a special distribution deal for your game. like Humble Bundle, Games with Gold, etc. Common knowledge is that those kind of deals don't hurt your game sales when done 1 year after the release or later. And I can definitely tell you that Fury Unleashed sales didn't drop after it was featured in Humble Choice. And sometimes they even increase, as it was the case with yet another Zombie Defense HD when it was featured in PS Now, probably because it's an online co-op game. So how do you get those deals? Simply reach out to the distributor, fill out their specific form and wait. Sometimes it will take months to get back to you. And don't push and don't complain. One time I received an exciting distribution offer which was later cancelled, and I've expressed my dissatisfaction but got nothing out of it except leaving a bad impression, so don't do that. On consoles, physical limited releases are fine for a guaranteed extra cash but are usually exclusive and lock you out from other forms of physical distribution. And you should also launch your game in Japan on PS4 and Switch. Thanks to IARC, it is now possible to effortlessly launch Switch titles in Japan. You just need to localize it, and it is well worth it. You can also get original publisher for Asia, like we did for Fury Unleashed, but we're yet to see how it works out. The game is due to launch next week in Asia. And the final lesson, let it go. Because it might be difficult to stop updating the game when you've spent a few years working on it, and players would like you to update the game forever, like Dead Cells does. But your game is not Dead Cells, so you should spend some time adding stuff you've always wanted to fix. But don't commit to major free updates. Here's a revenue over time chart for Fury Unleashed. And unfortunately, none of the bumps on the chart can be attributed to free updates we have released. So maybe it's better to port it to new platforms that you weren't able to deliver for launch. Usually ports can be done in a few months, and sale of the same title are usually the same order of magnitude. So do the math and see if it is worth it. Indie game sequels are usually not very successful. The reason is that people are playing indie games for a unique experience, and a sequel is exactly the opposite. But it's a good idea to stick to the same genre or perspective, as you can utilize the code base you built and experience you have gained. Switching to a completely different genre means you will only partially be able to take advantage from those. And finally, keep improving. You'll get better with time, and eventually success will come, or at least I hope so. So thank you all for listening to my talk, and special thanks to my team members who are sitting there and who made Fury Unleashed possible, and also to my family who has supported me through all those years. Thank you again.